Professor Calderon here. So we are late in the game now, and I hope you're able to see these different components and these different spaces, and how directors you are or how the space is recreated or represented in each shot, and how the director composes them. Okay, so we have this idea of composing the shot to create space, right? Deep space, flat space, limited space, ambiguous space, open space. Okay, we have all these components that create those space, right? Hue, shape, line, color, tone, and so on. And so, what in the book, he breaks down each individual component individually. Okay, so I've gotten us to the point where I've introduced briefly each space and how they function and what they are. And in the book, he goes over those spaces, those components over again in a greater detail. So I invite you to do that. But because it's so late, I want to skip ahead to an even a more important idea. And you guys know enough now to connect this idea to what I'm about to tell you. Okay, so the idea of contrast and affinity that we've talked about so far, right, states that when there's contrast, right, there's a sense of heightened emotion. And when there's an affinity, there's a less visual emotion. Okay? Less the visual reaction is the emotional reaction to the visual is decreased. Okay. So let's take that same idea and apply it to the concept of telling a story, a narrative, right? Even better. Let's apply it to life, because that's what a movie is about. A movie is a screenwriter sits down and says his idea of life or his view on life is like this, and he tells this story and imbues in it his ideas or his views on how life can be. Okay, so in life, when everything is fine, right, everything is going smooth, there's an affinity, right? Until one day you get in your car, you're headed to school, and boom, someone rear ends you, or you miss the bus, right? Now there's a contrast, because you gotta hustle, you gotta be aware, you're alert, your adrenaline's pumping, you're upset, you missed the bus, or someone hit your car, they've interrupted your life. Okay, that's what screenwriting is about, that interruption of life. Okay, so we get these characters, and the writer establishes the character's normal life through the visuals, right? Through the showing and the telling, the dialogue, the setting, the exposition, the backstory, right? All these elements will show the audience the main character, the protagonist's life when it's normal, right? So let's think to like a general story, The Wizard of Oz. Dorothy's life on the farm. She's living with Auntie May and her aunt, her grandfather, and she's got uncles and everything, and Toto, and everything on the farm it's fine. It's got some drama going on, nothing too serious, until she runs into a little trouble with the old hag lady down the street, and she wants to take her dog away. Right? That's the biggest thing. Yes, it's a big interruption to her life, but pales into comparison when you see what's about to happen. Okay? So she runs away, and she's swept away in a tornado. She's swept away in a tornado and miraculously survives, but she's transported into this whole other world. It's the laws and the rules are completely different. There's houses made of candy. There are talking crows and flying monkeys, and she has to get home. Okay, that tornado was that moment of contrast when everything was interrupted. Okay, it was a significant event that occurred in that character's life that turned everything upside down. Okay, it literally turned everything upside down. Okay, so visually, we can approach that moment where everything's turned upside down. And as a director, when I've in my mind's eye, as I'm trying to visualize or see this movie, I have to keep in mind that that moment that hurricane comes, everything's turned upside down. That's the big contrast in her life. That's the huge event. We call it the story event, right? The inciting incident that turns everything upside down for her. So visually, I have to heighten the audience's emotion to drive that scene in, right? To make it relevant, to wake them up, right? So what do? When I shoot that event, I use a lot of contrast. Whatever it is, it could be contrasting colors. It could be contrasting shapes and sizes. I can go from deep space to flat space to deep space to flat space, right? Limited space, and then right? And everything before that, leading up to that moment where the hurricane comes, I can shoot all of that in flat space. Maybe a little bit of limited, but predominantly flat. Flat, flat, flat. So that by the time visually the audience gets to that moment where the hurricane comes, they've seen so much flat space that the fast cutting and deep space that I compose my shots in for the hurricane event is a high contrast to everything else. And emotionally, it sticks out because visually it's almost all this deep space coming. Okay? So that's how we apply all of this stuff. That's what you're looking for when you watch a movie. Okay? You're looking for to understand film. You're looking for, how did the writer craft the story? Then there's the performance, right? But then there are the visual elements, right? Did the director hammer out a visual system to tell this story? Was it visually well crafted? Right? In addition to being well written, was it visually a masterpiece? Did they put some thought into it? I mean, look at Ron again. Look at those shots, are amazing. The battle scenes, the colors, the deep, the telephoto lens, the staging up and down, and all that stuff is very, very intentional. So, is there something identifiable on the undertone, with all this knowledge that you have now of deep space, flat space, right? When you look at a movie or watch a show, what is the visual structure that they're applying? Are they engaging you at that visual level? Or are they just, we'll just set it up here. It doesn't matter. How are they using the space? Think about that. Okay? They're pulling at those little nodes in our brains, right? Visually, to connect us to the emotion in the script. Because the script is the emotional blueprint of the story. Okay? We can even take the script, right, and go from page 1 to page 100. And we can create a graph and chart as we read the script. Let's say this is the beginning. Here's Act 1, here's Act 2, here's Act 3. And let's say at the beginning scene, the emotional intensity level is here. But then the next scene, it gets a little bit dull, and it goes down here, and then it just stays down here until that inciting incident or that event happens, and then the emotional intensity is way up here. Okay, and then we can do this for the whole movie, charting it out, and then we can take this same graph and decide, okay, well, if I'm going to use, let's say, lines, how can I contrast the lines and build a structure using this graph of the emotional template of the script, right? So in this scene, I'll have it'll be maybe limited space, and then down here flat space, and I'll keep it flat space, and then up here I'll use diagonal lines, because diagonal lines are much more emotionally, we get emotional, more of an emotional reaction from diagonal lines than horizontal and vertical lines. So in these scenes, I'll keep these lines horizontal and vertical, up and down, left to right. And then over here, where it's more exciting, I'll contrast them diagonal to flat, to diagonal, to left and right, to diagonal. I'll have more of a contrast to match this emotional peak in the script. And so that's what we're looking for. That's what we're striving for in telling this story, right? And we use this graph for several things as a director. You can use it to plot or sort of gauge what type of performance do we need to grab from the actor right now, because the actor may think, oh no, this moment right here has to be the big, and it's not. And so the director can look at, come on, dude, tell him, bring it down a bit, bring it down, right? Save that energy for this scene here, okay? So we're plotting this emotional peaks and valleys of the story. How does the director, the cinematographer, how is the production design, all of these elements in the production, the lighting, the staging, the camera movement, the linear motif, how are all these elements coming together to tell that story? That's what we're looking for. Okay? All right. Post questions.